And welcome back to the Infinity Stone podcast. As always, I'm your host, Matt. And this week, for our 12th episode, we are discussing Avengers Infinity War. We've reached the end of the line of our long podcast journey. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Andy. And we will be beginning with some trivia.
Yeah, it's I like to put the hurt on Matt early, like, Thanos and Thor. And they'll just set the tone here. So,
but here's the thing. Here's the thing. If I win, I can just rewrite the entire reality so that I'm ahead.
Yeah, you'll have to wait till you can get that time stone as well. All right. So, like the protector of the stone in Vormir, you have a powerful responsibility here, Alex. And wouldn't it be amazing if one of the questions is where the soul stone is, and I already got it right?
Maybe I already got it right. Maybe that's a question for me.
All right. So, Alex, ask us our questions.
Look.
Yes, you're doing the Doctor Strange thing. I got it.
First one is her dad.
All right.
What does Black Panther say to get the army to attack?
I don't know. It's something in Wakandan, isn't it?
Yeah.
I guess it's still a word. The answer is I don't know.
Huh?
Wakanda forever?
No. I actually don't know how to pronounce it. Yabombe.
Yabombe!
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's a call and response thing. Yabombe!
That's right.
Oh my god.
All right.
Well, yeah.
What are Peter Parker's last words?
Tony, I don't feel so good.
He says, Mr. Stark, I don't feel so good. Is that your final answer?
Yeah.
I don't want to go. That's what I'm saying it is.
You're both wrong.
We're both wrong. I felt like he said one more thing. I'm sorry?
Yeah.
I still get it!
I'm sorry. I'm
Yes!
sorry.
I'm taking that one.
No, you.
No. I don't think you get that one.
No, you already asked me the question.
Yeah, but you didn't give the answer.
No, but he said no.
I feel like we, at various times here, kept shooting until the clock went off. All right, well, fine. I don't need your pity points. I'll just take my own question right now.
What does Drax call Thor?
He is... You're going to cover that up. It's like a pirate had a baby with an angel.
Yeah.
I think Matt knew that one too.
He also calls him a man god. He calls him a man, a handsome man, a muscular man.
Yeah, he's not just a dude. You're a dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But point me. All right.
Yeah.
Name one member of the Black Order.
Oh, Ebony Maw. He's my boy. One member or all members? You want me to do all members?
Do you actually know all of them?
Yeah, Cull Obsidian, Proxima Midnight, and Corvus Glaive.
Yep. Yeah, Cull Obsidian was the one that I wasn't
thinking.
thinking.
Big one has a name.
Hey, he said it. Cull Obsidian.
Yeah, Cull Obsidian.
Oh, I thought it was Black Dwarf.
Oh, you know what?
No.
In the comic.
Oh, that's the one in the comic books. Yeah.
Yeah, but they didn't want to
I
name
think
him Black Dwarf because they have a giant dwarf. I'm guessing later, so they went with the.
I
Cull
could give you
Obsidian.
2 points for that one since I was.
What?
I could've- Whatever. We can do this.
He got it.
This last one is worth all the points anyway.
1 point.
No. Okay. Last question. Let's do
All right. What's the last question?
How old is Thor?
1,500 years.
Wow, you got it right.
All right, so that only puts you down like a bunch to me,
No, man, I think I'm only down 2 now. So we just got to keep recording for 2 more movies.
And I'm sorry to let everybody know, but this is the last episode. So say goodbye, Alex. We're never going to do this again. I win! I win! The universe is perfectly balanced. All right, so you watched Infinity War, just one time with us this week, right? Yeah. So
how much times have
you've now seen it 3 times, which is more than me. You want to host this show? No. What do you think? What do you think of Infinity War now? Because I remember the original experience was a little harsh for you. Speak out loud. People are listening.
Since I know what happened, it kind of makes it better feeling than
first time around.
Yeah.
So do you like this movie?
No.
No.
It kind of, yeah.
Hey, you're allowed to have your opinions. What do you think is going to happen in Avengers 4?
They're just saying all come back. Seriously, why would they all of them have movies? They're all coming back.
Spoilers for everyone. Oh my God, he's starting the podcast with that. Matt and I were going to pretend the whole way. All right, bud. How have you enjoyed being on these past 12 episodes?
It's kind of a pain making questions up.
Yeah, it sounds like it's more of a pain for the people that are helping you make the questions up. For you, it's like, oh, I gotta turn my video games off. No, he doesn't always on screens.
Mostly all the time, so I'm on screens, and then you call me over, and I go straight back to the screens.
You have plenty of times in your life when you're not on screens. Don't let people think that. But I mean, is it more than maybe best recommendations? Maybe a little bit. Yeah. Daddy's got to have some naps. All right, get out of here then. Thanks, Alexander.
I Funko Pop.
Well, I'll be sitting in the middle this whole time, so people can look at your hard-earned collection. Then
I spent about $100 on these.
Yeah, but he refuses to get blonde-haired Black Widow because he just disagrees with that fashion choice. And for the longest time, he was not a fan of bearded Cap until there was, an exclusive. So you run against popular opinion with the hatred of bearded Cap. Good night, Alex.
If I ask you to what end? Dread it, run from it, destiny arrives all the same. And now it's here. Or should I say, I am.
And we're back off of yet another trivia win from me, myself, and I, the true underdog and future champion. But we're here to discuss Infinity War. And so, Andy, I imagine this is only your second, maybe third time seeing this. So let me ask you this. Did you enjoy it as much as you did in the theaters?
Well, it's two different experiences, obviously. In the theaters, I mean, first off, you don't know what's going to happen. And very much of a lot of this movie is hanging on that last moment. So, it doesn't have that same, emotional wallop that, hit you with. But yeah, I mean, it's a series of big spots. The thing I seem to respond to a lot throughout this podcast, when I'm picking best sequences, just when I'm responding to what I like about superhero movies are, big action superhero sequences and just big acts of superheroism in general. And that's pretty much what this movie is, back to back to back. It's the cinematic equivalent of what if we built the whole plane out of the black box?
Yeah, no, I see your point. So for me, this movie is like tailor-made for the movie theater because it's a movie where like you just kind of feed off the crowd, or at least I did. Which isn't to say that I disliked it when I watched it again. I still liked it. But like when I had that first theater experience, I came out of there thinking this movie was like amazing. And now I'm like, oh, okay, it was good, but it's not like in my top 5.
I still came away like admiring it quite a bit, and even the second time. Now it helped, I think, especially compare our viewings. I ended up watching it beginning to end nonstop. Which frankly is a little unusual for me at a movie at home now. That's actually one of the reasons I like to go to a movie is I will finally see something without interruptions. And it's just, now knowing what's happening, I'm still just kind of marvel at the fact that this is just, and pun intended or whatever, but this is just a huge spectacle of movie, and there's not a lot of fat in it, and they just keep pounding you with stuff. And definitely when you're in theaters, I watched it in IMAX, all that, like you really feel the pounding of it, and for me in the best way. But I still, like, even at home, it's just like, there's just so much stuff happening. And maybe it helped that my second viewing, I was watching it with somebody who was watching it for the first time, so then just through his eyes, it could be like, oh, now's the part with Spider-Man. Oh, here's the part with the Guardians.
Yeah, no, and so one thing I think that's really impressive at this movie, in some ways that might be the best thing about this movie, is the sheer engineering of this movie is very tough. It's a high bar to clear. And I think they do it really well. Like, they have to serve so many masters in this movie, and it doesn't feel like they're bending over backwards to do these things that they have to do for the different parts of the movie. And I think that's like really incredible. And it's not to be taken lightly.
Yeah, and like just to talk about like how many masters they need to serve, just look at like the credits listing beforehand, and like what the amazing negotiations must have like gone forward, is like who gets here, like
Right.
What Chris Pratt's representation had to do in order to get that, and with Chris Pratt at the end. It's like, there's just a lot of things to put in. And we talked about this with Age of Ultron, and that, that is also a movie that's jam-packed full of things that we like, but it isn't stitched together as well as we like. It's not as engineered as this one. And I do think like it's just an impressive feat of, maybe not even storytelling isn't quite the word, but just how they get all this stuff in without, at least for me, for 2 viewings, doesn't feel like, too much. It doesn't feel like it's barely holding on the way that Age of Ultron did.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think, it's interesting comparing this to Age of Ultron. I would say that Ultron, the highs of Ultron for me are higher than the highs of this movie. But as you said, the way this movie is stitched together is so much more preferable to that of Ultron. For instance, like I feel like we always know what's happening, what people are trying to do in this movie. There's no like, why is this person doing this? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? This movie's very clear about that, and yet it never feels like that. The exposition dumps are taking over the movie and distracting from it. They have, and which I think is actually really clever. They have Bruce act as the like new kid on the block because he's been away for so long. So everyone has to explain to him like what happened in Civil War for the people who haven't seen that. And Doctor Strange and Wong explain to him what's going on with the Infinity Stones. Like Bruce Banner is suddenly our fresh eyes, but that doesn't feel weird and like out of place to us because one, he's an actor that we've seen in a bunch of these movies. So we want to see scenes with him. It tells us something about his character, but it also does that necessary work. And then also, like, the motivations in this movie, the goals in this movie are pretty clear. And we're going to talk more about what we think of those goals later. But I think it's to the movie's immense credit that it is very clear about what people are trying to do. And that simplifies the movie so much in a very good way.
Yeah, and I think that the thing this movie does that Age of Ultron didn't do, so maybe it's learning from that, but also maybe Age of Ultron couldn't afford to do just because of where it was in, the movie making process versus what this is it assumes some things. It does make sure to tell you like the important things. Like for one, much of Thanos is introduced in this movie, and that is the kind of connective thread that we get throughout. But And they make sure to do the exposition on the Infinity Stones because you need to know that if this is the only movie you're seeing. But otherwise, they just assume who these people are. The Guardians of the Galaxy come flying in on a spaceship, singing a song, and it's if you're a fan, if it's actually pretty good to see them bond like that. You see Gamora singing, right? Like that's a great moment for the fans. But it's not going to stop.
You see them all speaking Groot. They all now understand Groot.
Yeah. So, and it just assumes you probably know. If you're watching this movie, you probably know. Maybe you don't know it all. Maybe you didn't see, early Thor films. Maybe, like when Loki resurrected himself. Maybe you never watched Doctor Strange. But if you didn't, who cares? You'll figure it out. We don't have time for you to catch up. And, they have the confidence to do that and the confidence you can get because they have receipts, man. They know that, like, most people are seeing movies, right?
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, they obviously know people are seeing most of these movies. And, like the movies that they probably have seen the least, is like what? Like Ant-Man, and he didn't show up in this movie, so they were safe there.
Yeah, and it's just like that, and just they understand now we can do this. And it's not something movies have really ever done before. Obviously, maybe sequels, but generally sequels are like 2 to 3, maybe 4 editions in. Usually that fourth one comes like decades later, or they're barely connected. Like Star Trek movies reset after a bunch. James Bond movies aren't connected at all, other than like a couple here or there. But they, so that's another reason why Age of Ultron probably with less confidence in that, maybe even earlier ones. Whereas now it's like, we know how people watch movies. If they didn't come see these in theaters, they've been on Netflix, they've been there. They have ways of doing this. AMC is giving all these, and it's more just like, you'll figure it out. Let's ride. This movie is going to have action, and we don't have time for everybody to catch up, and it's not even going to help you. If you didn't care before, hearing some person talk about it isn't going to make you care now.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing, and you're not going to really go to this movie unless you've seen some of them, so that you do have this baseline of, caring about at least some of the characters. I'd say the one place where the engineering of this movie might fail is that it underfeatures some characters who are like the most prominent in this. Like for instance, Captain America, not featured very heavily in this, but also that's probably because he's going to be featured very heavily in the next one. So usually the ones who get underfeatured, they're going to have a bigger part to play in the sequel. I'd say like the one exception to that might be Black Panther.
Yeah, and I think the difficulty, well, for one, as we discussed last week, Black Panther being underfeatured in movies isn't that uncommon, including his own.
No.
But I think that's the other thing that makes a little bit of this discussion difficult is that, it's half of a story, right? So if you're kind of discussing it as a story, it's half, but I still feel like there's enough movie here. It is a full story. This is the story of Thanos's, quest.
Triumph.
Yes, and his triumph. Yes, we'll get the other story next, and that is also, I think, how the engineering of the film works. Is that Thanos is a connective thread throughout. As much as they're introducing anything, they're introducing Thanos, what he is, what he can do, why he's doing it, and thus why everybody needs to stop. Because when you have a villain as strong as Thanos, both literally and figuratively, story wise, but also just and his motivation is so clear, and so the consequences so dire, everybody else's motivations are easy to understand. Ultron was muddled. We never fully understand what he was doing in the first place, but Thanos is like, this guy is going to kill half the universe, we got to stop him, and everybody else is just like, we got to stop him.
So since we're talking about Thanos, let's talk about Thanos. This movie is centered around Thanos, as you said. Did that choice work for you? Do you think that worked from a storytelling perspective? And then I guess secondly, what did you think about Thanos' motivations?
Yeah, so I think he works really well. And I think Josh Brolin gives a really good performance. And interesting note, it's not just like voice, he does mocap. If you look at the gag reel, he's in there with like a big head and like fists and stuff, so that the eye lines are correct. And I do think he really works because it's a megalomania, which most of these villains end up defaulting to. Some people, criticize almost for that. It's like, he's just going to end the world again. But like, he has a reason for his megalomania. Now, some people like they did with Killmonger start thinking maybe he's right. No, of course he's not right.
I don't think people were ever really thinking that Thanos was right. I think that can be disproven pretty easily, especially if you've ever, read anything by a philosopher named Malthus, who basically proposed what Thanos did, which is that overpopulation is going to kill off the world, and there's scarcity and all that stuff. Only what we've learned in the 150 years since the guy said that is that one, population increases exponentially. So if you kill off half the population of the world, it's going to grow back very quickly, actually. So this whole it will fill the amount of resources there are. And two, there isn't a finite number of resources because there's always ways to increase yield. But ignoring that for a second, Thanos,
Thanos has the power just to increase resources even if they are finite. Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. If he has all 6 Infinity Stones, why doesn't he just do that? But here's the thing that I think works for me about Thanos. And this is a thought that I've had for a while. I don't think that Thanos is I think that you can look at Thanos' reasoning and be like, I think this is kind of stupid. I don't agree with him. But why I think he's effective, and I do think he's an effective villain. And you might say, well, he's not great, but I do think he's effective. And the reason why he's effective is because, as you said, his motivations are clear. Whether or not you agree with them is fine, but his motivations are clear, and he has a self-belief in his own rightness that he never wavers from. And the one time it's put to the test is probably his best moment, which is when he has to get the Soul Stone. And you can believe what you will about him at that moment. And I think Gamora does a very good job of puncturing his own self-belief and kind of sending that up. But he is fully committed to his goal, and he is fully committed to that this is what he has to do. And he believes, what he believes in that moment. And I think because of his own self-belief, he is an effective villain. Like, he buys into what he's selling. So even if you think it's stupid, the movie works off the fact that he has completely and fully bought into it, and he doesn't waver from it for a moment.
Yeah, and then the movie, like, right off the top of the bat, establishes that, like, this guy is not to be messed with. He's taken out Asgard, he's taken out Thor, and then, he beats Hulk around like a rag doll. Like, Hulk is his skirt for the rest of the movie. And so, we know then he's tough, and then throughout the movie, we get to see, like, this is a real threat. This is going to take every, thing the Avengers have, but then just, like, the quest of it all, first of all, gives the movie structure, like just a really simple structure that this is why MacGuffins exist for storytelling purposes, right? And so we as an audience, of course, we're rooting for our heroes. We want to see them beat this guy. We're not sure how, because look at how easily he's beating people. But you also kind of want him not to, because you want to keep seeing what Thanos is going to do next. So just from a structural argument of, like, is Thanos a good villain? It's like, yeah, because he gives this movie structure. He has a clear defined sense of purpose, and it gives everybody else a clear defined sense of purpose. There's no oh man, should we really be doing this? It's like, yeah, do this or die. And even like some of the small conflicts, like Tony trying to protect Spider-Man, that's all well and good, but what happens to Spider-Man actually has nothing to do with Tony allowing him to be there. It would have happened no matter where Peter Parker was. And that's the threat that Thanos presents. It's all hands on deck now.
Right. And so, but this is what I will say. So I think we agree that Thanos works in this movie because he presents a clear purpose. And by doing so, as you say, he presents a clear purpose for the heroes. I think the thing that he fails that some other villains in Marvel have succeeded at and other villains in comic book movies have succeeded at is there's no moment where I sympathize with him. Even in his most, what's supposed to be his most sympathetic moment, I think, where he kills Gamora, someone who he loves, I don't sympathize with him in that moment. And we talked last week about how I think a villain's power and a villain's kind of sympathy comes from they have a legitimate events. They have something in their past that they are acting out against that we look to and we're like, yeah, that sucked. I understand why you're acting out against that. I don't think Thanos' grievance in this movie is all that compelling.
They didn't listen to him on Titan, man. You see what happened to Titan. No, I mean, I agree with
He's like a neckbeard. He's like a neckbeard saying, like, why don't you listen to me?
Yeah, I'll kill everybody to show I'm right. No, I agree that I'm never sympathetic for him. For me, that's not a necessary component for villaindom. I'm
not saying it's necessary.
Villains being evil and a great evil that our heroes have to put out.
No, right. And I'm not saying it's necessary for a villain to be effective. And again, that's why I'm saying, like, the villain for this movie. But I think it's why, for me, he's not a great villain in the way that Killmonger is.
I can see that argument. For me, he is one of them. And maybe it's just because the threat level makes this movie more exciting. All right, buddy. I think that's enough. I think it's time to go to bed, Christopher. How about you come here, buddy? Are you feeling all right? Is it that you don't want to go?
Mm-hmm.
Here, how about we let everybody see everybody? Yes, that was Christopher. And this is him in his homecoming costume. He finally got it. Christopher, I have a question for you.
What?
Have you had fun doing all your costume stuff these past 12 episodes? Yeah?
Oh.
Has the podcast been fun for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's been your favorite bit?
I don't know yet.
It's been, how about your Spider-Man video? Did you like making that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. Do you have any questions for Matt?
Do you want to see my web wings fly?
Sure. Let's see him.
No, don't jump off the bed, buddy. Nobody can see that anyway. You stand back there and show everybody web wings. There they are. That's the whole reason why you wanted this costume. All right. Are you ready to go?
Yep.
Good night, buddy.
Bye.
Bye.
There we go. That is Christopher's final appearance on our regular podcast here.
Yeah.
What were we talking about? We were talking about Thanos, right?
We were finishing up Thanos. I think we've kind of talked Thanos to death, unless you had another point to make. But there is one more thing I want to talk about before we go to break, which is let's talk about Star-Lord's actions on Titan.
Is Star-Lord the real villain of Infinity War?
Because that was the question that people were throwing out there for a while there. And I say no, of course not. Because one, Doctor Strange saw this future, and obviously, this is the one future where they won that they are on. But two, I mean, Star-Lord's acting completely in character there.
Yeah, I think what happens a lot, and obviously, some people are just expressing their frustration. I mean, the glove was on his fingertips, which I didn't catch the first time, but second time around, because it was there, man. Spider-Man had it here. Mm-hmm. So yeah, some people obviously, their frustration because in many ways, at least in the moment, it feels like Star-Lord is losing it for him. And when Star-Lord's doing it, he doesn't know that Doctor Strange has seen that this whole glove thing isn't going to work anyway. Right. But so people, frustration with that. But I think also a lot of times with people when they're levying their charges against movies, why doesn't Thanos just create more resources? Why does Thor not do that? They misunderstand characters acting in illogical ways with mistakes of movies. And Thor is perfectly in character. This is, of course, what he's going to do. He is not a hero. He is not even a very thoughtful person. He is somebody who acts based on his feelings. And I touched upon this, and you probably backed me up in the very first Guardians movie, where the best, most affecting scene to me is when he finally reaches out for his mother's hand. This is who he is. He's somebody who has dealt with trauma and loss, and mostly he's dealt with that by not dealing with it. So now he's confronted with one more trauma, the loss of this person, probably the first person since he was a 9-year-old boy who he's had a reciprocal love for. Yeah, I buy it. I buy what he did.
Yeah, no, me too. I mean, it's a stupid thing to do, but it's a stupid thing to do that he would do. And that's the difference there. It's not something that's dumb that is out of character. It's something that's done that's completely in character. He is, right, as you said, he's still he's had one basically, as you said, reciprocal relationship his entire life until this point. And yeah, he's mad. He loses his cool there.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, he takes the L. Absolutely. That one is on him. But, but
he's not a villain for that. He's not a villain for giving into his emotions. We're not playing by Jedi rules here.
Yeah, he's a flawed human. And frankly, most of this film is about how, the humanity of the characters prevent them possibly from doing what is necessary, in contrast to the villain who is prepared to do everything that's necessary.
Yeah.
Losses on all sides, so they're not willing to destroy the vision. They're not willing to, Star-Lord just can't let that moment go. I believe there's other moments, but Captain America.
Yeah, no, those are the two big moments. Captain America says we don't trade lives. Thanos is happy to trade lives. That's his biggest moment. He trades a life for the stone.
Yeah, the only life he cares about, right? He's a little bummed that the Maw is dead, but it's he did his job. It's just
justice for Maw, Ebony Maw, man, he was the best.
I mean, I think he's the only of the villains that is named within the movie. The other names that from marketing and toy packaging. And I don't think they say Ebony at all. Yeah, and it's just. But ultimately, and some people might see it as a flaw, right? And I think, there's maybe a fair argument. It's maybe they should have just let Vision go, except that,
Again,
No,
it's in character. It's in character to do everything they can to save Vision. You know, it would be very odd for Captain America to suddenly turn around and be like, "You're right, Vision. We got to kill you."
And frankly, that's nice. It doesn't matter unless Scarlet Witch is ready to do it. They can't do it, right? So even if all they have to do is humor her. And I guess the other moment is that Star-Lord takes a long time to finally kill Gamora. And ultimately, the one thing that these all have in common is it wouldn't matter. If you're saying if only this happened, Thanos wouldn't have won. No, as we saw, Thanos had already gotten the Reality Stone. It was over. There was no time that Star-Lord could have killed Gamora that Thanos couldn't have stopped him. There was no time that even if they would have gotten that glove off of him on Titan, I'm guessing he still would have beat them down and got the thing right back on. We saw him beat the crap out of the Hulk, and Scarlet Witch does kill Vision, and it doesn't matter. He just turns back time. So, ultimately, it can feel like these are failings of our heroes. They aren't ready to meet this the way it's supposed to be. But I suspect, and we'll see, that ultimately why they will prevail is their humanity. That's what makes them different from Thanos. They will find a way in the end.
Yeah, I think you're right. So, anything more to say, or should we go to break before we come back and talk about our favorite scenes?
Let's get to favorite scenes.
Okay.
You should have gone for the head.
And we're back, and we're here to talk about our favorite scenes. Andy, hit me up. What do you got? What's your favorite scene?
This is actually, you kind of mentioned this, how the highs of Age of Ultron are, higher. And I actually agreed because I did have a bit of difficulty picking out one of my favorites.
Yes, thank you. Because I enjoy this movie, but I don't think there is a standout scene in this movie.
I kind of feel like it's always running up here, right? And it's almost maybe kind of the downfall or the flaw of a movie that is just high spot after high spot, and just constantly moving, taking very little time to catch his breath, is nothing feels bigger than the other, and that's usually what has the highlights. So I went with probably the highest of the highs, and that's Thor's arrival in Wakanda.
Okay.
Because the Wakanda fight itself has a lot of big moments, but it also maybe drags a bit. But once Thor hits the scene, man, it is on and it is for real, And frankly, it is good that they didn't do it because it would have just almost felt too jokey, especially in that particular moment. But you could have put an Immigrant Song on that moment.
Damn it! That was the joke I was gonna make. I was gonna make that joke. I was the one thing that moment was Immigrant Song. That moment is a good moment. I find that some of the best small moments in this movie are the character entrances. Yes. For instance,
like when Captain America's in shadow, and then the end. Oh man, chills.
And then even Falcon has a great entrance there too, where he comes flying in and kicks Proxima Midnight. I really like the Guardians have a good entry, where they're all singing, grooving along together. So I find that one of the things this movie does really well is those kind of here are these characters, and when they introduce those characters, it's usually really fun moments.
And each
for my favorite,
a shot of adrenaline, right? It's blah blah blah.
Yeah,
Hulk, boom, yeah, it's Hulk, yeah, it's Peter Parker, yeah. That's throughout, and that's probably what kind of keeps a bit on that high too, because you get probably about an hour before it's it's Black Panther, it's Bucky, so they keep doing that, but they're all pretty small moments. I'm not gonna sit there the whole time oh man, the time when Captain America, but again, the time when Captain America's in shadow, oh my god,
that's the best one to me. When Captain America comes out of the shadows, that one. Especially because he has the whole train path cliche entrance too, which is so good. My favorite moment, I really enjoy the I guess it's not the opening battle, but the fight in New York where Doctor Strange, Tony, Spider-Man, Wong are fighting against Ebony Maw and the big guy Cole Obsidian. One, because Ebony Maw is the best villain in this movie. Yeah, no, I love Ebony Maw. He's so awesome. And he goes out like a chump, which in some ways stinks, but in other ways it's like, yeah, no, they weren't beating this guy straight up. He was toying with them. It was great. Like, and just watching him like just really funny. And I mean, but like also like I think it was exciting. And I really enjoyed that fight. And I thought that was a really good fight. And that's probably my favorite like big action sequence in this movie.
Well, that's one of probably only 2 action sequences that have humor in it as well, which humor is a big staple of why we like these movies, that they keep it fun. In fact, you saw in the trivia segment that Alexander still doesn't know if he likes this movie. It seems to kind of run counter with the fact that like he watches it wide-eyed. But it's because this isn't the movie that delivers what Marvel almost always delivers, and that is good feelings, great vibes, right?
And that's a good point.
Time.
Yeah.
This is not a fun hang, and because not only is it like it intense, it starts with the slaughter of Asgardians and ends with the death of half of our heroes. And it's we'll get into what that means and how he's like clearly had no impact or whatever. But no, it does. You leave feeling a little bummed one way or another, whereas usually we feel like the heroes won. It was a big moment. And so the opening fight, they're joking around. Bruce Banner's kind of nabbish, and Spider-Man's go find the wizard with the cape or whatever. Like, it's fun. The only other time that's kind of fun is the very brief skirmish between the Avengers and the Guardians.
Yeah. So the other moment I'd signal out as one of the best moments in this movie is Peter Parker's dusting. I think that's the moment that kind of gets me during that whole thing, because I saw this movie, I was expecting to end with the snap. I was expecting it to end the way it did. So when it was happening, I was like, oh wow, he did it. And so like most of the first guys that were like disappearing, I was like, okay. And then when Peter did it, it's not just that it's, a big character who they obviously have big plans for in the future, but it's also, they have established his relationship with Tony. They have, really worked on that. And then Tom Holland's like, man, that kid's a star. Like, he just sells the heck out of that moment so well.
Yeah, it is easily the most emotionally effective of the deaths. And talking about it this way, I don't know why we're delaying it. We're going to talk about it soon. It disproves the lie where everybody's like, these deaths don't mean anything. If you didn't feel anything in that moment, that's on you. The movie sold it. Even if, at the end, you're like, of course, to bring back Spider-Man. Frankly, as soon as they dust Black Panther, that these deaths aren't going to be permanent. And frankly, I took great comfort in that. I actually wasn't really all that excited to watch a movie where all the people I like died. I know, like, that was the thing. Like, everybody's going in like, who's gonna die? And there's gonna be such a bloodbath of Infinity War, and they're all excited. And everybody, because they're such smart movie fans, was predicting everybody whose contracts were probably coming up, the people that aren't featured in the movies. And frankly, I love that the movie went the other way. It's like, nah, man, all those people that you were giving like 100% guaranteed safety to, Black Panther, Spider-Man, they probably thought Bucky, because he might take over, or Bucky or Falcon, one or the other, will take over as Captain America. No, they're gone. We're doing that. Yeah. That's what we're doing. We're really going for it. And for me, I was like, man, way to go. You really did it. And the fact that there's no permanence to these meant nothing to me, because the emotional, it felt like it, these characters don't know that they will come back, and the people that are watching them die don't know that they will come back. And thus it has meaning. And yes, very few things have more meaning than a young, child begging for their lives.
Yeah. So, you know what? We're talking about it. Let's just dive right into it. Skip ahead. We'll come back to our biggest flaws in a moment. But let's talk about this climax, because we're already doing it. So, one, you have engaged this criticism a little bit already with that, speech there, which is that, look, we know these deaths aren't going to stick, right? We know how the business works. It's money. Black Panther's getting another movie. Spider-Man has another movie announced. How's he going to be in that if he's dead, right? So, does this have meaning?
Yes.
Failure has it does. Meaning. Yes. I mean, and that's the thing. Like, there's this entire idea, I think, out there that the only way you can have stakes in a movie is if there's death. And to kind of, have these deaths that we know, because everyone knows how much money that won't stick, that they're meaningless. But I don't think that's the case. As you just said, failure has meaning. What these deaths mean to the characters that are alive has meaning. And it has meaning to those characters. And so I think that's still important. And the last thing I will say is death is not the only stake. Like there are so many more stakes other than death, and I feel like it's a reductive thing to say that death is the stakes. But you also want to talk about this, so I'm going to give you a shot.
Yeah, obviously, like we've been picking at this sore throughout this entire series because, obviously it was the common complaint for Infinity War, and I do want to give some level of fairness to some people that are giving that before I completely be unfair, because that's the way I structure my arguments in all things. But for what I think for some people, they're not really into this type of storytelling, but they go to these movies maybe because it's social obligation, maybe because they genuinely enjoy them, but they're not invested. And I will say, like in many other forms of storytelling, death is a permanent state. I want to say not all. Game of Thrones started bringing people back from the dead. Freaking Roseanne brought somebody from the dead, like resurrection and like death fake outs happens a lot. Sherlock Holmes was killed like 100 years ago, and he still seems to come back for more stories. But I think for a lot of people that aren't used to continuous storytelling in this method, and this is a very new thing for movies, then maybe they're put off because like death usually is the undiscovered country that we don't come back from. So from that, it's like oh, they're just completely undoing it because we know it's not permanent. And to that, I'd be like, were you like that at the end of Empire that Strikes Back? Why are they bothering putting Han Solo in this carbonite? We all know he's going to be back for another movie. Or did when, at the end of Empire Strikes Back, when all of the heroes lost and the villains won, did that have emotional heft for you? Because that's what this is. Take the death out of it all. Thanos won, our heroes lost, and trillions died as a result, and they have to live with that now. And also, and that will set up something that will actually be incredibly unique for all of these movies, plus a lot of other movies, is that they're no longer fighting to save people's lives. They're no longer fighting to save the day. The day is lost. The lives are gone. Now they'll be fighting to restore for a second chance, and that's something that they've never done before. They never because again, nobody's changed reality on this level, and that'll be an interesting storytelling. So just from that, it's interesting. But moreover, the idea that death is the stake. And I think you and I pointed out several times that these movies actually have killed people, and none of them felt all that stakey, because that's not what stakes are. You don't need to kill somebody for a story to have meaning, for action to have drama.
And may I jump in here, because I want to point to something that I think kind of sends this up. I think there are times when death is a very good stake. I think we've seen examples of that in these movies. I think one of the best examples of that is Phil Coulson in the original Avengers, who, of course, was resurrected in a TV series. Ignore that for a moment. Let's pretend you don't know that. That is a death that has stakes. It has meaning because you've built up a character, and it has meaning, but it has meaning because it means something for the other characters in that movie. You know what death has no stakes? Quicksilver and Ultron. That death is like meaningless, and yet he's supposed to have meaning for these other characters. He's supposed to have meaning for his sister. He's supposed to have meaning for Hawkeye, and yet it lands with like a wet fart. Like it just sits there, and you're just like, okay, like whatever, and you forget about him to the point where, Andy, after that podcast, you were like, oh, I meant to talk about Quicksilver. I'll do it when we get to Infinity War, and I think you had forgotten about him until I just mentioned it.
Like that's an example of like a death that was put in there. Actually, we did talk about it a bit because we talked about how like it's Whedon doing this whole thing. But yeah, that's where stakes have become. This whole death equals stakes has come in our sight, is that we expect it. We need it to the point where people had all these death polls going in, and frankly, this isn't the first time. Everybody's like, oh, is Captain America going to die at the end of Civil War because he did in the comics? Is this going to happen? Right. It's like, no, it's not going to happen. A, because it's a business; they want to make more money, and B, death in storytelling often sucks. If you're telling open-ended stories, which what these movies are based on what comic books are, why are you taking tools out of the box to hammer, hanker and like prevent future possibilities? And like, this is a problem I have as a comic book reader. A lot of people will complain about all the different ways they resurrect or the times they resurrect people they kill. I never have a problem with resurrecting characters. I have a problem with killing them in the first place, and obviously, this is just attempts to try and do little stories, but it's like, if they would have kept, Jean Grey dead because, one of the best X-Men stories ended that way, generations upon generations of people never would have read Jean Grey stories. She was dead in comics before I even started reading them. And that's so, in this format of which you're trying to tell stories forever, which is very much what Marvel is trying to do. If they decide one day we're not going to tell these movies anymore, they close up shop. They cease to be. This is all they got. They can't just transition to start telling romance stories unless they, dust off some of those old comics. So yes, they do want to keep this going. So death can't be a stake because, frankly, it's the end. And if your story doesn't have an end, and we like that they don't have an end, or at least $2 billion of money for this movie suggests that we like that it doesn't have an end, then why are people rooting for death in the first place? And like just last week, I was upset the way they just killed off two characters. Nobody cared, because nobody cared. It was like it was nothing. So death didn't have stakes for the Warriors 3. Death didn't have stakes for the entire realm of Asgard. So the idea that death equals stakes needs to be written out. Stakes are stakes. Emotion equals stakes. Motivations equal stakes. And this movie has a lot of them, I think.
Yeah, and I think the reason why death has been conflated with stakes is because, it gives you that juice of emotion. It's like, oh, well, obviously people will care if someone dies, right? But it's a shorthand, and if you don't do the work to back it up, it's meaningless. And one of the reasons why I wonder, and obviously I'm not someone who's affected by this, but the fact that the snap, that so many people got dusted, and then people came out of that and they were like, oh, well, it's all going to be reversed. I wonder if the reaction to that is in part driven by the fact that it's almost too big. It's almost too big to wrap your mind around the fact that so many people died. And so it's not oh, well, my objection is not the fact that they kill people. It's the fact that you can't appreciate the death because it's so many. If you focus upon one person, I think it works better. If you focus just upon Peter Parker, and him dying, I think this works in some ways better than if you focus upon half the life in the universe. It's like that statistic where if people hear about
millions of
200
people,
die,
statistic, one person is a tragedy. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Right, and so that's my point. So in some ways, the snap, and the reaction to it might be caused by that saying.
Yeah, and it's just for me. Yeah, again, when they killed Black Panther, I'm like, okay, good. Because I really am not excited about seeing, Falcon and Scarlet Witch and all these people die. I like these heroes. I want to see future stories of them. But yeah, for me, it's just okay, this is something new. They're really going for it. They actually did it. Yeah. And that's another funny thing about going to message boards for comic book sites, which is one of the reasons why I felt like this podcast had a voice, is that it's always just the same people just, regurgitating the things they've known for 20 years. Well, of course it ended with snap. Why are people acting like it's a surprise? The story's been out for 30 years. As if any other Marvel movie has ever followed the story of the title it's been given. This is the one time. So me, it's man, they actually did it. Good for them. They did it. And they didn't skimp out. And frankly, I was excited about what what this means. And I think that gets to the next thing of they undercut the drama or death equals stakes. It's not what they've done is they've cleared the decks quite a bit. And the next movie pretty clearly is going to be the OGs and their story, which I think can transition a bit into my discussion of one of the flaws of the movie, is that naturally some people had to be sidelined. And some of those people were the people I cared about most. As I think we already touched upon it, Captain America is not in this movie very much. We get just a couple notes of, Cap being awesome, but that's it. Hawkeye is not in this movie at all. Black Widow, kind of commensurate to Steve. So I think it actually is really exciting that they, we introduced this new wave, this new generation of, characters. They're going to be what powers the next, whatever movies. I don't know if they're going to call them phases from here on out. Yeah. But yeah, it's kind of not so bad that they got rid of Spider-Man and Black Panther and all that, because now we can get like one last hurrah. If they had killed off all the people that people thought they were going to kill off, everybody was sure they were going to kill off Captain America, because Chris Evans has given an interview saying he's done. We'll see. But it's just like, then it would have been like, oh, that's it. That's all. Now we get one more big story where the heroes, from the moment it starts, know the stakes, know that they have to do everything, know that they might have to trade lives, because it's no longer about stopping a villain, which they've done many times before. It's about undoing all of this.
Yeah. Right. No, and yeah, and one of the interesting things about the engineering of this movie is, on rewatch, I noticed much more obviously, that they set up storylines for some of, like these original Avengers that were not tied up. The storylines they set up that didn't end in this movie were usually for someone like Bruce, who's having his ongoing struggles with the Hulk. And that's obviously not resolved at the end of this movie, because guess what? That's going to be a big part of the next movie. Or Iron Man and his relationship with Peter, which is now going to be, that's a huge part of the next movie. So like, these are stories that they set up in this movie that they obviously intend to carry forward. Thor, I think you could also put in that sense. Thor, who's dealing with all this loss throughout this movie, which segues kind of into my flaw, which is that this does a lot of Thor Ragnarok, which we talked about last week. But I don't know, they needed to give Thor a new eye. I don't know if they need, yeah, sure, give him a weapon specifically designed to kill Thanos. Okay. He got beat by Thanos his first time. So maybe the fact that...
it was great that he had the power within him all the time, but he still wasn't strong enough to beat Hela. So I'll let the new weapon thing, especially because they need to sell more toys,
Right. But come on, man, he looked great in an eye patch. Why give him a new eye?
Yeah,
Did Chris Hemsworth was like, man, I can't act with this eye patch?
That's all great and all, but we need Chris Hemsworth looking all handsome. Just say, no, Taika, you can't blind him.
Yeah. So that's something that I got a little bit of a problem with. But any other flaws that you want to talk about?
And this is kind of the second hand. This will be interesting going forward for us in this podcast. Is some of those things are probably the things you pick up on multiple views. A real flaw you'll pick up on right away. But for me, like in general, and we talked a bit about this, a general reaction or even the engineering. The feeling of this movie is just like a nonstop rush. And I know some people might even be put off by that. But for me, that's what I signed up for. That's what I wanted this one to be. And this one is uniquely that, would I want all movies to be, this jam-packed end-to-end adventure? Of course not. No. But this is one. I can't even think of other movies that are like this, because they couldn't be. They're not the 19th part of an ongoing series. So for me, just like that feeling, and I feel like it maintains it throughout, that's what I take away within the two viewings I've had so far. Yeah. And the future ones might feel like that, but I also feel like sometimes when people rewatch these things and all that, they confuse nitpicks that they have with flaws, and they're not the same thing.
No, and I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. And I agree with the point you make. Like, this movie, it's 2.5 hours long, which when you say that, it sounds very long, but it moves, and it moves pretty well, and it keeps you interested a lot. So I actually watched this twice this past week. The first time when I was rewatching it, I was like in a really bad mood that day, and I felt this movie's length. And so I just rewatched it again the next day, because I was like, nah, I feel like I didn't give it a good shot. And when I rewatched it again, I was like, oh wait, no, yeah, this is good. I'm loving this. This is moving. This is not and so I'm really impressed with the way they kind of kept this movie going and just moving. And it doesn't feel like 2.5 hours. Yeah. I mean, it feels long, but that's because a lot happens in it.
Now, I think what thing that keep it, and I haven't done my rankings yet, it'll be interesting, is it's not a personal movie, right? It's not. This is the greatest hits collection. This is all that. So yeah, I won't have the same emotional attachment, especially when you also factor in that like it's a bit of a heavy watch, at least until you see it resolved. So like I can't imagine this would be anybody's personal favorite of the collection. And I think that's maybe kind of how this will work, is that like the smaller ones, the tighter focused ones will, can have, do more things for one, like do different, more interesting things. And maybe have that personal connection. And then this is like 40 characters, man. Like this is like, I didn't think they could pull it off, and I feel like they did. And one of the ways they had to do
agree
that like everything has to be about moving forward. Everything has to be, generally plot driven. You'd have little side moments, especially because Marvel has mastered how to do that with just like a quickly repartee between, say Iron Man and Doctor Strange, which I actually really dug their dynamic.
Me too.
But still, we don't have time for fat. If it's not there, it doesn't move. That's where, and sometimes, the fat is where interesting stuff happens, even in Ultron, the scenes of the cabin. But there's not time for that if you're trying to do all of this. And since this movie is, all apologies to the memes out there, is the most ambitious crossover in cinematic history, let it be that. And then, there's other movies that can be a little bit more. Question.
Let me ask you a question. Oh, well, you were going to ask me a question. I think it's going to be the same question.
Probably the same one because we have it written down here on our screens.
Yeah. Ignore the man behind the curtain.
Who's your MVP of Infinity War?
Doctor Strange. You were talking about him. You like his scenes with Tony. I love basically like anyone he's interacting with. And I think he has some of the best action scenes in this movie. I talked about the New York battle with him against Ebony Maw. Those I think are really awesome. But then the end of the battle on Titan, when he has like duplicated himself and he's like fighting Thanos one-on-one, that is the most interesting part of that fight in my mind. And that is the most exciting part of that fight in my mind. So Doctor Strange for me is like, he's the MVP of this movie. And like, I came out of the movie thinking like, damn, I don't like Doctor Strange that much.
Yeah, I think
because frankly, rewatch.
His movie and in that moment, because as you say, like he's the closest actually in that whole fight that it looks like there's somebody who might be a match for Thanos or might be able to give him a fight. Because ultimately the other guys are just like, I got some guns, I've got some muscles, right? And they're all they could really, and I guess Mantis has a little bit of power, but otherwise, it's like, punchy Drax, who we already know is no match for like Ronin. You have, kid Spider-Man zipping around. You have Iron Man. So it's just like, it's punchy, shooty stuff, which, man, we saw this guy like waylay the Hulk. So all they could really try to do is get the glove off of him. Whereas, Doctor Strange is doing a bunch of stuff. We saw Doctor Strange stop Dormammu. So maybe he could be something. Right. And just like, I agree about, like his scene within that. And, when you look at his movie, it's like, what Doctor Strange this tells us is like, even if we're never that invested in this character, and I feel like in this movie they've shown how they can use him in playing off with different people. As I say, Iron Man, I like his little brief moments of Spider-Man. They're always going to be visually delights. Like they should be visually distinctive and interesting. And I'm ready for a Doctor Strange 2, which hasn't been announced, but they barely announced anything because they killed everybody. But the director, there's been rumors. The director's been a bit online, like hinting that he's starting to work on the sequel.
Got it. Right. I mean, and also just you made reference to it, but the moment when he and Spider-Man have that little exchange of where Spider-Man introduces himself, Peter Parker is like, I'm Doctor Strange. Like, oh, we're doing those names. I'm Spider-Man. That's a good funny moment. And it's just like, and then he also has
no, it's your point.
Well, no, I was also going to say he also has that great moment with Star-Lord where it's where they get into the battle and he goes, "What master do you serve?" And he's like, "What do you want me to say, Jesus?"
Or how about him and Wong even at the beginning? It's like, the path to enlightenment and all that. Oh, I'll tell that to the guy at Delhi. And it just shows like, that's where his strength is. He himself isn't necessarily funny, but that he is so serious and so arrogant.
And pompous. They have a good time puncturing his pomposity.
That you can get jokes off all around him, and I feel like that will be the direction they'll go, because that's what we saw in Thor. That's now obviously different directors, different writers, but there's one guy that's kind of in charge of all these movies, and it would be weird for him to be like, "No, Scott Derrickson, don't do any of that," even though it was the most successful parts of the character. But yeah, and it's just like I love
Indeed.
seeing his arrogance with Iron Man because Iron Man's always the top dog in every room, and maybe might have some battles with Steve, because Steve has such a clarity of purpose. But Doctor Strange is like, no, man, you're just rich guy Tony Stark. I don't work for you. I'm not interested. He doesn't speak for me, and that you get to see some of the air coming out of Tony Stark in his presence.
Yeah. So
and their facial
let me
hair
ask
bros.
you this.
Can I
they
say
are
my
facial hair
MVP?
bros. That's what I was going to ask you.
It's Thor, man. It's totally Thor, and obviously not just in the scene where he comes and basically saves everybody's asses. Not in the scene where he almost defeated Thanos. He should have gone for the head, or maybe cut off the arm connected to that Infinity Stone. I think he has actually the best, Peter Parker dusting aside, best emotional ways, and they do it in a good way, in a way that shows that they could have done it a bit better in Ragnarok. Although some of it's a continuation of what they did in Ragnarok. Is that he's still trying to plow forward, he's trying to push forward, he's trying to be the hero that he's been his whole life, but the weight is getting to him, man. And
this is a tough couple weeks for Thor. This is because basically like all of this, Ragnarok and this is like what, 2 weeks?
Maybe, yeah. Obviously, we don't know because time moves differently in Sakaar, but yes.
That's true.
And like just like his scene with Rocket, and he's still like he's not wallowing, and he's just like
no, he's trying to laugh it off if anything, and it's like obvious that he can't.
Yeah.
So
and it's just great work because he's still fun, he's still funny, but this is real stuff, man. And like his whole people are gone. He's lost everything. The scene with Rocket.
Well, half his people are gone. If you paid attention, they did say half of Asgard has been.
If you're wondering, people, the director's already gone and said, no, Valkyrie's on that other ship. She'll be back. They haven't confirmed Korg and Meek, but Korg and Meek. If they were killing them off, they would have had him lying on the floor like they were in the Warriors 3.
Right.
But so he just has that emotional weight, and then when he goes to Nita Valir, my man held back a star and then shrugged it off. I mean, MVP, right?
He didn't shrug it off. He needed some help from Groot and the axe hammer thing. I do actually really like that moment, especially when Groot forms the weapon with his own arm. I think that's a very effective moment there.
Yeah.
Thor's a good choice.
Kind of interesting because Thor was the weakest part of the Marvel universe, Hulk accepted, which we mostly just ignored, Incredible Hulk wise. And now, post Ragnarok, post this, like, man, who's bigger than Thor now? And they need to make a fourth Thor movie with him in his true stature. Ragnarok obviously is a great movie, and but it's still also almost like, we're taking one last shot with this guy. Now they can kind of, they need to do a Thor movie where Thor is the top dog that we're all rooting for. That he is finally, and there was always pieces of this throughout, but he is Marvel's Superman in all the ways that DC won't let Superman be Superman.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'd say another choice might be Bruce Banner. I think has a really good movie, and I think that we were talking about how this movie doesn't have a lot of time for humor during its big fights because it is a heavier movie. Banner's the guy who's providing humor during a lot of his fights, or during a lot of the fights. Like him and the Hulkbuster. Him fighting Cull Obsidian. He has those moments where you're like, Hulk, now would be a great time. And he goes, fine, I'll do it myself. And, it's like, I like what they've been doing. You're talking about Thor's emotions. Those land well. I think Bruce's emotions land pretty well, too, with his frustration with the Hulk and the fact that he has to figure it out on his own. And in his professor persona, he should not be a superhero, right? But he's still trying to get things done. So
we haven't talked about this. There's actually like a strong undercut of people who Bruce is acting very unusually. It seems like a complete, change in character in the way he was. Now, I'd say it's actually kind of a continuation of him post Ragnarok, which, as we've said, not that long ago. Although I suppose we don't know how much time passes between like leaving Asgard and being discovered.
I think it happens like in a couple days at least. So
because him and Loki are still acting like, oh wow, we've really done this. To the point where there's a fun little fan theory out there that what if Bruce Banner isn't Bruce Banner? What if that's Loki? And I thought the text supports it a bit in that, for one, like Loki's sacrifice is kind of unusual for him anyway, and he really thought he was going to dagger, Thanos to death. But also, like, and he calls out that there's a Hulk, and then Hulk gets beaten all this way, and then he isn't the Hulk at all. But so that's a fun theory, and I encourage you guys to look it up because there's actually some good arguments. There's a billion fan theories, and most of them are whatever.
Except that I feel like he almost transforms into the Hulk like a couple times, and we see the Hulk like yell out there.
Yeah, but Loki can, have those illusions. What his illusions can't quite do is actually, punch something until it flies, right? But it
makes no emotional sense. It makes no emotional sense if that's actually Loki arguing with himself.
Why does Bruce know? Yeah, that's the thing. That's what undercuts the whole theory and why I don't think that's what it is. Because there are moments when it's just Bruce being Bruce. Nobody else is around to fool. But, there's other things. It's like, like why does Banner know so much about the Infinity Stones and Thanos? That sort of thing. Like that's something Loki would know. Loki knows about Doctor Strange. So I don't know. It's a fun theory. I don't think it's true. I think that is Bruce Banner, and I think a fun performance and a continuation of the journey that Hulk is on, which I believe will finish up in the next movie. That we will get an explanation of why Hulk is so absent, besides just that he's shook.
Yeah. So let's go to break, and then let's kind of come back with our big idea.
Did we just lose? Why would you do that? We're in the end game now.
And we're back, and we're here for our final big idea. Let's see how we do here. But this week we will be discussing everything. Look, we've reached the end of the line here. This is the connector of all the interconnected universe. This is what it's all been leading up to. So let's kind of discuss that. Let's kind of discuss how, this has changed the way people try to make blockbusters. Let's discuss whether it was worth it to try to connect everything. Let's discuss whether or not it worked. Let's just discuss everything that we want to discuss about the overarching nature of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Andy, where do you want to begin?
I'm not sure. I'm going to begin talking and see where we go because, that's kind of what we've been building, and that's one of the joys of watching these movies in such short order is you get to see the whole picture. And ultimately, is it worth it? Did it work? I think the answer is absolutely. In that it is a very unique thing in ways that I think some people have not been quite willing to give it credit for. In some ways, because it feels like praising a corporation for making a lot of money. As a thing I've talked about throughout, which maybe sometimes feels like unnecessary shots, but very legitimately feels like what's going on in some of these things is that this isn't necessarily what some of the people writing about want from movies. Is something this monolithic or whatever. They want a little bit more variety. Although I think, as we've discovered throughout, like there's a lot of variety and storytelling techniques and the type of stories they've been doing, but yeah, it's something different. And I think what people get lost in, and maybe it's because it's so big, right? Like these are the most successful things and the thing that drives so much traffic. Like, I get why a writer on a website doesn't want to write about half the stuff they're forced to write about, because I click on some of those articles. It's like, wow, that was a complete waste of my time. You had to build an article based on the fact that like the new word treatment for the upcoming Captain Marvel is released. Yeah, that's pretty sucky blogging that you have to do, but I bet that one probably gets more hits than something that actually has meaning for you. So yeah, I can understand that frustration. So from that is like, I understand, but like, yeah, it's amazing that this has happened, that they've made this, a medium which wasn't really built for it. Obviously, movies have had sequels for a long time, but usually those stories would wrap up in trilogies if they were lucky. And a lot of that had to deal with you could say it's arguments about beginning and middle and end, except that each movie should probably have a beginning, middle, and end, unless you're doing something with like Empire to Jedi or Infinity War to whatever. But also because of like just the financial constraints of movie making, that you're not going to have actors and directors stay on for that long. You figure you can only skin the cat so much before audiences will tire. Maybe you'll run out of stories because they are not based on original properties that have yet to run out of stories. Although I guess you could argue maybe that's because they just keep recycling them. But like, this is pretty amazing that they did this. And what they did is they brought TV to movies in the serial storytelling, but they did it what TV can't do, in that like TVs don't have this kind of budget. They can't make things that look and act like this.
Yeah. So let me focus this a bit. I think one of the joys of the shared universe, and I want to talk like about specific things that we enjoy from the fact that these movies are interconnected, at least at first here. One of the joys is not just the big movies when we see all the characters coming together, but when a character pops up in someone else's movie. It is fun to see the moments like when, for instance, Captain America is doing the videos during Spider-Man Homecoming. Like those are fun bits of where a character who exists in Spider-Man's universe pops into his world. Because again, like this is a universe with Captain America, where Captain America is the ultimate Boy Scout. So like, yeah, of course he'd be doing cheesy movies there. It's fun to kind of see how this world works beyond just the scope of like one guy and like his one adventure. Or for instance, when Thor meets up with Doctor Strange, like, yeah, like Thor is a magic, like level, or Loki really, in the case of that meetup, is like a magic level disturbance to the world. Like, it's nice to see someone pay attention to that, to care about that. So I think one of the biggest joys of the shared universe is to see these characters interact with each other. And that's something you don't get, in other movies.
Yeah, and it rewards fandom, right? Fandom has always existed. It's always been a thing for like things of this type, whether it be, superheroes or science fiction or fantasy or whatever. And traditionally what, fandom would have to do is build universes outside of the medium, whether it's through something like fan fiction or, like Star Wars had 3 movies. Yeah. And then it had so many books, TV series, toys. Like it was just like this, huge comic books, just everything piling on to this world building because the fans thirsted for it. There was an audience for it that they didn't say, no, you got to stop at 3 because that's the perfect storytelling measure. They wanted more. They wanted to live in this world more. But that couldn't be delivered. Nobody would do that. A studio didn't want to keep paying, a writer for their vision for that much. But when the studio only exists to do this one thing, they can keep rewarding fandom. And so for us fans, we can invest in this knowing that, at least once a year, twice a year, 4 times a year now, we get to revisit in this world. And obviously, how they continue feeding that fandom. Well, there are these comic books that have existed for a while. That's one way. But then the other way is this steady stream of news about the films themselves because the fandom has grown around the film. But yeah, it's just like, as a fan, that people are into this kind of storytelling. Yeah, world building is a thing that you'd be excited about. And the difference is now you don't have to read some novelization of it. You don't have to read, all, the different texts of Star Wars, which have been, ripped out of canon. Everything's canon because there's $100 million movies being made, and so it is rewarding. And I think some people would say, like your examples of the Captain America thing showing up Doctor Strange, like that's just fan service. And my counter argument was to be, no, that's fan service. Why are we getting upset at purely fan driven movies? These aren't high art and were never designed to be for serving their fans. That seems like just good business to me.
Yeah. So one thing, I've heard a lot of people say like, well, I can't get into these movies because I have to watch all of them. And I think it's pretty clear that, or I'd push back on that because I'd say you don't have to watch all of them. I think these movies, they're not all reliant on what's come before. Now, certainly for something like Infinity War, it would probably help to watch a few of them beforehand. So that, but what watching all of them gets you is just greater knowledge of the characters. Every movie still stands on its own, I'd say every movie still stands on its own. Some you might have to work a little harder for, but I still think they all stand on their own, and I still think you can enjoy them if you haven't seen the others. But if you have seen the others, you have a knowledge of these characters such that you don't have to constantly be reintroduced to them. You don't have to learn what they're about anymore. You don't have to learn all about their dynamics with other characters. And so when the new movie comes along, you can just go. When a third Thor movie pops up, we don't have to learn what his relationship with the Hulk is. We don't have to learn what his relationship with Loki is. We can just go and deal with that and deal with a new journey. And so because we're constantly not restarting, because we're continuing stuff that's come before, you can jump in at any time, but you can also kind of appreciate, all the relationships that have come before and that we've built upon to this point.
And it gives them like a depth that like these kind of stories might not have. And I want to suggest like these aren't super deep movies, but again, I like to compare these to what they are, and that is other blockbuster franchise filmmaking. And it has a depth because it's not just having to skim at the surface of like, meet this person, this is what it is, and we're going to keep them in basic archetypes because really we have a lot of plot to move through or something like that. They've done the work to the point where as what we've noticed going through, some of the earlier ones we're less interested in, not just A, because they got better at it, but B, because it's more fun when you don't have to necessarily muddle through that. Okay, this is who this person is and why they exist. It's like that can be a good story, but there are more stories to do. And obviously, like a lot of movies just have that one story. And obviously for some movies, that's the story. This is the one time in this person's life that would be a thing. But for these characters, if you had these fantastical powers, it'd be weird that you only have one story, right?
Yeah.
In fact, that was some of the issue of the earlier movies, because they were, and I mean earlier, not Marvel movies, like pre-Marvel superhero movies, is they were playing by the old rules. It's like, well, we might just have one movie. So every time they were just like, okay, well, this is kind of his reason, and he's trying to solve this one thing. And, Batman finds the killer of his parents in his very first movie, that sort of thing, which would seemingly close the loop of Batman. These movies aren't going to do that, and thus, it is rewarding. It rewards people that are going to watch, but you're right, you don't need to see them all. That's the most facile of arguments, and people really like to stretch it. It's like, I've got to watch 20 movies and 100 hours of TV shows. I haven't watched Okay, I was going to say I haven't watched a minute of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I watched 42 minutes of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I watched the first episode. Okay. I have not watched a single other one. It doesn't matter. You don't need to see that. You don't need to see a single Netflix show. And the movies have ensured it. They can't. They will not cross over with them. And people, TV fans get a little proprietary over that. It's just, it can't be done. TV shows get done in a week. Movies take years. It's just, that level of crossover cannot work. So you don't need to watch all the TV shows. And I know many people who saw Ragnarok, and again, the receipts prove it, that didn't see the earlier Thor movies. Did they get less out of that movie? Frankly, I'd argue it barely changes a thing.
Yeah, I know many people who saw Black Panther who did not see any of the other movies. And you know what? I think they still enjoyed Black Panther a lot.
And to take it like another example, I love the TV show Game of Thrones. I will never read those books, and frankly, I'm very proud of that. And I dig it, you nerdy book readers, every chance I get.
And you're pointing specifically to me here because you know that I am a nerdy book reader of those books.
Yes, and it's just like that. That's how a lot of these things work. There are more things out there. There's been so many Star Wars tales out there. I will never view them. Doesn't mean that I feel like when I'm watching the Star Wars movies, I don't understand what's going on. And I do think the Marvel Universe has done a good job of that. Like, they don't do things like, well, if you read the comics, you would understand. It's like they've rightly recognized that the strong majority, 95% of their audience has not and will not ever read one of their comic books.
Or watch their animated TV show where they revealed that a character most people thought was dead is actually still alive, and then show that he's alive at the end of a movie that you plan to be a summer blockbuster and don't explain why he's alive. Do you even know what I'm referencing?
I do not.
I'm referencing Solo.
Oh yeah, that's how they did it. Yeah, I mean there you go. So they don't do that. Yeah, as you say, they bring Coulson back. Everybody else in the world who doesn't watch that show, which is by its ratings, most people in the world, can just act like
he's got a 6th season, dude. Like there are some people watching it.
Well, sure, and there might be a reason why Disney would keep going with this property on the television network they go. It certainly has some people. Frankly, a few times lately, I've been like, maybe I should check it out. It certainly is probably better than some of the other stuff I've checked out. I watched Inhumans.
Yeah, it's better than Inhumans. I haven't seen Inhumans. I can guarantee you that this Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is better than Inhumans.
It would almost have to be. But yeah, you could just act like Coulson was dead if that's how you're hanging out, because he's never coming back to the movies probably. But yeah, so like that is a weak excuse, but more it's just like this is something different. And I think it needs more credit that they've done something different, that they've built a big universe, and don't let like the copycats drag that down. Like, oh, they've ruined movie making because everybody's going to try to do that. I've newsflash that people like just need to like understand or remember for all of like the outcry they get. Most of these movies, of these big blockbuster movies, suck and have always sucked. It's not high art. It never has been. So yeah, maybe Marvel doesn't reach the highest of highs that makes it feel like it justifies the level of attention it gets. We should be excited and proud that they've maintained a high level of quality, that the biggest movies in the world manage to not suck and insult their audience, because that is rare.
Yeah, so let me make a couple of points real quick. One, Coulson is coming back. He's going to be in Captain Marvel. Two,
set in the past.
Set in the past. Two, blockbusters are notoriously copycat-driven vehicles. They copy the most successful thing out there. So the entire idea of like, oh, well, Marvel's doing this interconnected universe, so other ones will do this, and that's bad. It's like, no, man, like blockbusters copy each other. And and if they're not as good as the other ones, it's not because they're copying the formats, because they're doing it poorly. Like I don't think it's the fact that DC's trying to make an interconnected universe that is the reason why those movies have not been working. I think it's the fact that those movies are not very good. But no, I mean, and I think that's kind of the point. Like blockbusters is really where this is being situated. And I feel like one of the biggest complaints leveled at Marvel is the fact that, like, oh, they've taken over the blockbusters. Like, it's like now all blockbusters are comic book movies, which, one, Star Wars, two, but two, it's like, yes. And that's because right now Marvel's the biggest thing on the block and people are trying to copy their success. They're trying to get in on that. But what's another big franchise that isn't a comic book movie? Fast and the Furious. That's probably the other biggest franchise in the world right now. The Mission Impossible.
It's not a comic movie, but it's kind of a superhero movie.
Yeah, well, I was about to say Mission Impossible, and again, kind of a superhero movie. I mean, yeah, the entire.
Well, that's the thing. Big heroes. That's how stories have always been, harkening back to like Greek stories and stuff. Back to the days of myth. This is nothing new. It's just that one companies decided, hey, these books that have been selling for 60 years, let's do something about it. And so shockingly, especially if you look at how those books have always sold, the public have responded to it. They've responded to this new kind of hero, and all it's done is like it kind of stripped away some of the edifice of like heroes are heroes. In the 80s we had that. We just didn't have comic book heroes other than 1989 with Batman. But Arnold Schwarzenegger was a superhero in most of his movies. They turned RoboCop into a superhero to the point where he had a children's television show. They used to sell like Freddy Krueger costumes for children. Like the appetite for superheroes, like for big hero, colorful hero stories has always been there. This is just the first, now they've just been like, well, let's just do it with the ones that are actually wearing the colorful costumes.
Yeah. So anything else you want to add to that?
I just think I instead of like bemoaning their dominance or whatever, I do think like, and why we put this together. Oh, and obviously, we're big fans. It would be stupid to do a podcast this long if you weren't a big fan, unless you think that there's a lot of money to be made in it. There's not. So we're big fans. But why are we big fans of this stuff? The answer is because they've consistently delivered something, an experience that has been pleasurable to me. And like nothing else has done that. Forget 19 movies in. Try to name another franchise where 4 movies in they did it this well. Like, and you say like, in my day, movies used to be trilogies. How many of those trilogies are still trilogies? No, they've come back and they've come up fourth, a fourth Indiana Jones, which was freaking awful. Star Trek has put out so many movies, and like only every third one is any good.
No, man, it's every other one. The even
that's
ones
what
are
they
good.
say. That's it. Even odd. I think that's being pretty generous. I don't feel like they've been hitting 500 in that series. Admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of that genre. But that's actually also a good example of the whole, you need to watch everything. It's like, I've watched Star Trek movies and gotten in, either enjoyment or not out of them without always watching the new Star Trek show. That's
fact,
how
I've never seen a Star Trek show. I've watched every movie. So
that actually surprises me a little. Just age-wise, I would have figured you watch, kind of Next Generation.
Next Gen, yeah. No, a lot of my friends have, but I never did. So
yeah, and that's another example. Is like, there's different levels of fandom and how Marvel, has successfully tapped into all of them. And then, what's special about it is that they've made everybody feel like they need to watch the next one. And then one of the reasons why they do that is not because people feel like, this is an obligation, I needed to see this or I won't keep going. It's because that if you go, it's not going to be a bad night. It's going to be, maybe some are better than others, but even when I walked out of Thor: The Dark World, I wasn't like, man, that wasted completely my time in the way that so many other movies I have, right? I've walked out of the most recent Taken. I'm like, that was garbage. That's usually how these things go. And frankly, that is usually, there's jokes within these movies, not these ones, but other ones. Like, why does the third one always suck? We're at 20 films in. So I think, instead of bemoaning that Marvel has, taken over the industry, I think it's some level of celebration that a big blockbuster filmmaking has been done in a way that hasn't insulted the intelligence of its viewers.
It is nice to be able to know that there's a baseline of quality we can get out of these movies where maybe they're not, the greatest thing we've ever seen in our life, but we know we're not going to have a bad time when we go to them. It's nice to have.
It's compared to food. Yeah. Okay. Marvel movies aren't a steak. They're not like a well done, French cuisine. But sometimes you really want a burger, right? And thus and some burgers suck. Some burgers are like, why did I put that in my body? But some are really good. That's what this is. And for me, with my, fully rounded, although it's not as fully rounded as I used to be because children make seeing movies a little more difficult. But my movie appetite, sometimes I want the big adventure movie, and these ones will pay off. Fast and the Furious generally pays off in a way that it's a franchise that just knows what it's doing. Even it's high camp and corn, but it knows what it's doing, knows how to deliver. A lot of times they don't, man. It's just how many times have we gone to these movies and be like, that was awful? Transformers is some of the worst filmmaking I've ever seen. There's six of those or whatever. Yeah, I think it does deserve some level of celebration because, I'm psyched to see Captain Marvel, the 21st version of this. So we're, excited by these movies, excited to still, see future ones. How did we feel about talking about them this whole time?
I think it was fun. Look, I did this because I enjoyed these movies. I enjoy talking about movies. I enjoy arguing with you, and I enjoy listening to you knock down straw men while I kind of laugh silently in the back and no one can see me.
Yeah, we're very much like men of this age where the only way we can get together for a conversation with friends is to record it and hope other people will listen to it. There's a lot of that happening in this, but no, I enjoy doing it. I want to thank everybody who listened or watched and indulged me in my shoehorning my kids into it. Although maybe for some of you it's it wasn't shoehorning, it was tolerating you until the next cute moppet came in. I think it was an enjoyable experience, talking with you. I've had thoughts about these that I've wanted to get out, and as we said off the top, I've kind of felt like there hasn't been a real place for this because where the real serious fans, the nerds, and I say that with some level of affection, get together to talk about this is usually not the conversation I was interested in having. I still like having some level of perspective of what these films are, what the true audience of these things are. So I think that we've provided that middle ground. Now the difficulty is, of course, how do you seek out middle ground viewers of something?
It's tough. But so I agree with that. So
And I want to just reach out to the people listening. Let us know in comments if you've enjoyed this experience with us, what you have liked. And a big question of would you be interested in us doing something different? Now, I mean, there's a question of whether we would be interested in doing something different or we should just go out on a high. Other than we will probably reconvene every once in a while for the next Marvel movie. But would you be interested in something non-Marvel? And we've had some ideas. I've shared one with you already that I'm like, stop me. But
yeah. Yeah, so let us know. But we're not done yet. We have one more episode planned, a bonus episode, if you will. We'll be back next week, and we will be ranking everything, all the movies that we've seen thus far, including one that we've seen but haven't discussed yet. So if you're wondering where our rankings were at the end of this podcast, you got to come back next week to hear them.
Yeah, so that'll be a full kind of recap of each. It'll be a bit of a review of us rediscussing what we liked about these movies. But one podcast, 20 films. It might not be next week just because I'm going to try to put some stuff into this one. It might be the big, mega blowout. So our bonus Infinity Stone podcast will be maybe the only one anybody ever cares about, because this is the internet and we need to organize our thoughts via numbers.
That's right. So, Andy, where can they find us?
Infinity Stone Podcast.wordpress.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, YouTube, where I put a fair amount of work into the video presentation of it, and a couple dozen people watch it.
And I think it looks pretty good. And you can, of course, follow us on Twitter at pod_infinity. So come back. Come back for our bonus episode. Tune back in when we have our regular check-ins. And thank you for listening. Roll credits.
All right, well, there we go. We did it. We did all of the movies we planned to do when we started this thing, man. We did it, Matt.
Yeah, the road to Infinity War is now complete. How are you feeling? You think this was good? Whoa, something's happening, Andy.
Matt, what's going on? Oh no, Matt. Oh.
Mom, Daddy's not in here. And someone needs to vacuum.